They called me G.I. Joke behind my back. My own family. While I was dodging bullets in Syria, they were making memes about my uniform photos. They thought serving my country was just another phase. Like when I tried vegetarianism in college, or wanted to learn guitar. They had no idea that 3 years later, I'd walk through our front door, wearing a medal that would change everything, and expose who they really were. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I need to tell you about the day I realized my family saw me as their personal entertainment rather than their daughter and sister. It was Thanksgiving 2019, 6 months before my first deployment to Syria. I was 24, fresh out of advanced training, and stupidly excited to share the news that I'd been selected for a specialized reconnaissance unit. The dining room smelled like turkey and disappointment, though I didn't recognize the second scent yet. My mother, Patricia, had set the table with her good china, the set she only used when she wanted to impress someone or make a point. My father, Robert, sat at the head wearing his usual expression of mild irritation mixed with bourbon. My younger brother Jake, 22 and still living in the basement while finding himself, was scrolling through his phone even before we sat down. My older sister Emma, 26, had driven in from Portland with her fiancé Derek, a software engineer who spoke exclusively in tech jargon and political opinions. I waited until everyone had their plates full before making my announcement. "So, I have some news," I began, setting my fork down with what I thought was appropriate ceremony. "I've been selected for deployment. Special reconnaissance. It's a huge honor and—" "Oh God, here we go," Jake interrupted without looking up from his screen. "Sarah's going to war." The words hit differently than I expected. Not the content, but the tone. Like he was announcing that I decided to join a circus or start a pyramid scheme. "It's not going to war," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's serving our country, protecting people. It's important work." Emma laughed, actually laughed, and exchanged a look with Derek. "Important work? Sarah, you're basically playing dress-up with the government's permission." My chest tightened, but I tried to stay calm. "I'm sorry?" "Come on," Derek chimed in, cutting his turkey with surgical precision. "The military-industrial complex is just a jobs program for people who can't make it in the real economy. You're basically on welfare with a uniform." Patricia, my mother, made a soft T.S. King sound. "Derek, that's not nice." But she didn't sound offended on my behalf. She sounded like she was correcting his table manners, not defending her daughter. "I mean, it's not wrong, though," Emma continued, warming to the topic. "What exactly are you going to accomplish over there? Bring democracy to people who don't want it? Come on, Sarah, this isn't some movie where you're saving the world." I looked at my father, waiting for him to say something, anything, in my defense. Robert was a Vietnam vet himself. Army, 2 tours, though he never talked about it. Surely he'd understand what this meant to me. He took a long sip of his bourbon and shrugged. "Your mother? And I just hope you're not doing this to prove something. Sometimes people join the military when they can't figure out what else to do with their lives." The turkey in my mouth turned to sawdust. "I'm not trying to prove anything. I want to serve." "Oh, spare us the patriotic speeches," Jake said, finally looking up from his phone. "You want to go play soldier because you think it makes you special. But you're still going to be the same Sarah who couldn't even finish that nursing program." That was a low blow. I dropped out of nursing school not because I couldn't handle it, but because watching people suffer without being able to really help them had nearly broken me. The military offered something different, the chance to prevent suffering rather than just treat its aftermath. "That's different," I said quietly. "Is it?" Emma leaned forward, wine making her eyes bright and cruel. "You've been jumping from thing to thing since high school. Remember the Peace Corps phase? The environmental science major you switched out of? Now it's the military. What's next, Sarah? Joining a convent?" They all laughed. Even Patricia covered her mouth and giggled like Emma had made a clever observation instead of listing my failures like evidence in a court case. I sat there, surrounded by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and felt utterly alone. The worst part wasn't the mockery. It was how casual it was. They weren't trying to hurt me. They genuinely saw my decision to serve as something ridiculous, something worth laughing about over dinner. I leave in 3 months, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Well, Robert said, raising his glass with mock solemnity, here's to Sarah's latest adventure. May it last longer than her CrossFit membership. More laughter. Jake actually took a photo of the moment, me sitting there with my mouth slightly open, looking stunned, while everyone else raised their glasses in a toast to my humiliation. This is going on Instagram, he announced. Caption, sister's going through her military phase, taking bets on how long it lasts. Jake, don't, I started. Oh, come on, it's funny, Emma said. You have to admit, you do have a history of enthusiastic starts. Patricia reached over and patted my hand with the kind of condescending gentleness you'd use on a child who'd announced they wanted to be a dinosaur when they grew up. We love you, honey. We're just worried you're making decisions based on emotion rather than logic. What if I am? I asked, finally finding some fire. What if I want to do something that matters, even if it's hard, even if it's dangerous? Because you're not thinking about us, Robert said, his voice sharper now. You're not thinking about what happens when you get yourself killed over there for no good reason. You're not thinking about the phone call we'll get, or the funeral we'll have to plan. The room went quiet. For a moment I thought maybe I'd gotten through to them, that they'd realized the weight of what they were saying. Then Jake broke the silence. Damn, Dad, dark. He took another picture. This is definitely going on TikTok. I excused myself to the bathroom and locked the door. In the mirror, I looked exactly like what they saw. A confused young woman chasing the next shiny thing that might make her feel important. My uniform hung in my apartment closet, pressed and ready. But suddenly, it felt like a costume I'd convinced myself was meaningful. When I came back to the table, the conversation had moved on to Emma's wedding plans. They discussed flower arrangements and venue options with the same casual energy they'd used to dissect my life choices. I might as well have been invisible. Later that night, Jake's Instagram post got 43 likes and 16 comments. Most of them were laughing, crying emojis and variations of classic Sarah. A few high school friends commented things like, "Wait, Sarah joined the army?" and "LOL, when did this happen?" Emma shared it to her story with the caption, "Family dinner entertainment, courtesy of my sister's quarter-life crisis." I screenshot everything before blocking them all. But the damage was done. Over the next 3 months, every family interaction became a reminder of their expectations. When I mentioned my training schedule, Patricia would say things like, "Well, don't get too attached to the routine." When I talked about my unit, Robert would nod with the patient expression of someone humoring a delusion. Jake started calling me Lieutenant Sarah in a mocking tone that made my rank sound like a joke title. Emma would text me articles about veteran suicide rates and PTSD, not out of concern, but with messages like "just saying" and "maybe think about this before you go." The week before my deployment, I tried one more time to connect with them. I invited everyone over for dinner at my apartment. Nothing fancy, just pasta and a chance to say goodbye properly. Only Patricia came, and she spent the entire evening trying to talk me out of leaving. "It's not too late," she said, picking at her salad. "You could tell them you've changed your mind. People would understand. This isn't the right path for you, Sarah." "How do you know?" I asked. "How can you be so sure?" She set down her fork and looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Because I know you. You're my daughter. You're sweet and you mean well, but you're not a soldier. You're not built for that kind of life. What if you're wrong?" "Then I'll be the first to admit it," she said. But her tone suggested she considered that possibility roughly equivalent to pigs learning to fly. The night before I left, I sat in my empty apartment. I'd put everything in storage and looked through the photos on my phone. There were dozens of family pictures spanning years. Christmases, birthdays, graduations, random Sunday dinners. In every single one, I was smiling like I belonged there, like these people understood and supported me. Looking at them with fresh eyes, I noticed things I'd missed before, how often I was positioned slightly apart from the group, how my achievements were mentioned briefly while everyone else's were celebrated, how my problems were dismissed while theirs were treated as serious concerns requiring family intervention. I'd been the comic relief in my own family story. The lovable screw-up who provided entertainment value but wasn't expected to actually accomplish anything meaningful. At the airport the next morning, only Patricia came to see me off. She hugged me at security and whispered, "Just come home safe, okay? Don't worry about being a hero. Just come home." I wanted to tell her that I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was trying to be useful. I was trying to matter. But she wouldn't have understood the distinction. As my plane lifted off, I looked down at the city that held everyone who'd ever known me and felt something I hadn't expected: relief. For the first time in years, I was going somewhere where people would judge me based on what I did, not what they expected me to fail at. I was going somewhere where being Sarah Mitchell meant starting fresh, with no preconceptions and no family history of disappointment hanging over my head like a storm cloud. I had no idea that 3 years later, I'd return to that same airport as a different person entirely. Someone they wouldn't recognize, carrying proof of exactly how wrong they'd been about who I was and what I could become. But first, I had to earn it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 months into my deployment, I understood why my family's mockery had cut so deep. It wasn't just that they didn't believe in me. It was that they'd never bothered to understand what I was actually volunteering to do. Forward Operating Base Phoenix sat in the Syrian desert like a concrete island in an ocean of sand and tension. The base was smaller than my high school, surrounded by blast walls covered in graffiti from soldiers who'd been there before us. Some messages were funny. "Hotel California, you can check out, but you can never leave." Others were more sobering. Names and dates, memorial notices for people who'd never made it home. My unit, Bravo Company, 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion, consisted of 12 soldiers specializing in intelligence gathering in hostile territory. We weren't the infantry kicking down doors or the engineers building roads. We were the eyes and ears, the ones who went places first to figure out what was waiting for everyone else. Our job was simple in theory: venture into contested areas, establish surveillance positions, gather intelligence on enemy movement, and report back. In reality, it meant spending days at a time in hidden positions, watching through scopes, taking notes, and trying not to get killed while doing it. My team leader was Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, a 32-year-old from San Antonio who'd been doing this for 8 years. She had the kind of quiet competence that made you feel safer just being near her, and she'd taken me under her wing from day one. "Mitchell," she said during my first week, "I don't care what you did before you got here or why you joined. All I care about is whether you can do the job. Can you do the job?" It was the first time in months someone had asked me a direct question about my capabilities without an undertone of skepticism. "Yes, Sergeant, I can do the job." Good, because out here doing the job keeps people alive, including you. The other members of my squad were Corporal James Washington from Detroit, Specialist Lisa Chen from Seattle, and Private First Class Marcus Thompson from rural Georgia. They'd all been deployed together before, and had the easy familiarity of people who'd shared foxholes and bad MREs. I was the outsider, the new person who had to prove herself. But unlike with my family, here the proof was straightforward. Show up, do your work, watch your teammates' backs, and don't make mistakes that could get people killed. No hidden expectations, no history of disappointment to overcome, just competence. My first real mission came 2 weeks after arriving. Intelligence indicated that an insurgent cell was using an abandoned village 12 miles north of the base as a supply route. Our job was to establish overwatch positions and document their activities for 48 hours. We moved out at 03:00 hours, using the cover of darkness to reach our destination. The village had been empty for months. Families had fled when fighting intensified in the region. Now it was just hollow buildings and streets filled with sand, perfect for people who wanted to move supplies without being noticed. Rodriguez positioned our team in a half-collapsed building that gave us clear sightlines on the main road and what used to be the village center. Chen and I took the first watch while the others rested. "You nervous?" Chen whispered as we settled into our position behind a crumbling wall. "Terrified," I admitted. She smiled. "Good. Scared keeps you sharp, overconfident gets you dead." For 6 hours, nothing happened. We watched empty streets bake in the Syrian sun and listened to the wind move through broken windows. My back ached from staying motionless, and my eyes burned from staring through my scope. But I didn't complain. This was the job. At 1,347 hours, Chen nudged my shoulder. Movement. 2:00. I shifted my scope and saw them, 4 men in civilian clothes, moving carefully between buildings. They weren't carrying weapons openly, but they moved with the deliberate caution of people who expected trouble. One kept checking his phone while the others scanned rooftops and windows. "Scouts," Rodriguez's voice came through my earpiece. "They're checking if the coast is clear. Mark their faces, note their routes. The main group will come after dark." We spent the rest of the day documenting everything. The scouts made 3 more passes, each time taking a different path but always ending up at the same building on the village's eastern edge. By evening, we had a detailed map of their movement patterns. At 2,130 hours, the main group arrived. 15 men with 2 trucks loaded with supplies. We couldn't see exactly what they were carrying, but the way they handled the containers suggested weapons or ammunition. They worked quickly and efficiently, unloading one truck and reloading it with different cargo from the building. My job was to photograph everything using a long-range camera with night vision capability. Every face, every license plate, every piece of equipment. The photos would be analyzed back at base and forwarded to intelligence units throughout the region. "Got it all?" Rodriguez asked. "Every detail," I confirmed. "Good work, Mitchell. Now we wait for them to leave, then we get out of here." But as the insurgents finished their work, something went wrong. One of their sentries spotted something. Maybe a reflection from Chen's scope, maybe just movement he didn't like. He pointed toward our building and shouted something in Arabic. "Compromised!" Rodriguez hissed. "Move, now!" What followed was the longest 20 minutes of my life. We had to evacuate our position while armed men searched the village for us. Rodriguez led us through a maze of broken buildings, always staying ahead of their search pattern, always finding routes that kept us out of sight. My training kicked in. Everything I'd learned about movement, concealment, and tactical awareness became automatic. I wasn't thinking about my family's doubts or my own fears. I was just doing the job, trusting my teammates, and following orders. We made it back to the base without being detected, and our intelligence led to a successful airstrike that destroyed a major weapons cache 3 days later. Rodriguez debriefed our mission with the company commander and mentioned my performance specifically. "Mitchell adapted well under pressure," she reported. "Maintained discipline, followed orders, completed the mission objectives. She's ready for more complex operations." It was the first time in my adult life that someone had evaluated my performance based purely on results. No family history, no preconceptions, just what I'd actually done when it mattered. That night, I called home using the base's communication center. Patricia answered on the 3rd ring. "Sarah, oh my God, are you okay? We've been seeing the news about Syria and—" "I'm fine, Mom. I just wanted to check in." "When are you coming home? This is so dangerous, and for what? What are you actually accomplishing over there?" I thought about the weapons cache we'd helped destroy, the intelligence we'd gathered that would protect other soldiers and innocent civilians. I thought about Rodriguez's evaluation and the trust my squad had placed in me. "I'm doing my job," I said simply. "But what does that mean? What is your job exactly?" I tried to explain reconnaissance work, the importance of intelligence gathering, how our missions contributed to broader strategic objectives. Patricia listened with the same polite attention she'd use for a telemarketer's pitch. "That sounds very dangerous for something that might not even matter," she said when I finished. "I mean, how do you know any of this intelligence actually helps anyone?" Before I could answer, Jake's voice came through the background. "Is that Sarah? Tell her the memes are still getting likes." My chest tightened. "What memes?" Patricia's silence told me everything. "Jake, that's not... Sarah, it's nothing important." "What memes, Mom?" She sighed. "Jake made some jokes about your deployment on social media. Nothing mean-spirited, just family humor." After we hung up, I found the posts. Jake had created an entire series. Photos of me in uniform with captions like, "Day 127. Sarah still thinks she's in an action movie." And "Update from Syria. My sister is apparently saving the world by taking pictures of sand." The comments were worse. High school acquaintances making jokes about Sarah's midlife crisis and stolen valor. Someone had even created a fake military bingo card with squares like, Sarah mentions her, quote, dangerous mission, and, quote, Sarah uses military terminology in casual conversation. Emma had shared every single post. I stared at my phone screen in my narrow bunk, surrounded by the sounds of a military base at night. Generators humming, distant radio chatter, the occasional rumble of aircraft overhead. My squad mates were sleeping in bunks just like mine, people who'd trusted me with their lives that day, people who judged me based on my actions rather than their assumptions. But my family saw it all as performance art, something worth mocking for internet points. The next morning, Rodriguez found me cleaning my rifle with more intensity than necessary. Everything okay, Mitchell? I told her about the call, about the memes, about the feeling that nothing I did here would matter to the people who were supposed to care about me most. She listened without judgment, then sat down across from me. Let me tell you something about families, she said. Some people can't see past their own small world. They can't imagine that anything important happens outside their experience. That doesn't make what we do less important. It makes them smaller. But they're my family. And this is your family too, she said, gesturing around the base. The difference is, we earned each other's respect. We don't give it away for free, or take it back when we feel like it. That afternoon, we got orders for another mission. This time, we'd be working with a larger unit to provide overwatch for a humanitarian convoy, delivering medical supplies to refugee camps near the Turkish border. The area had seen increased insurgent activity, and recent attacks on aid convoys had made the region extremely dangerous for civilian organizations. As I checked my equipment and reviewed our mission briefing, I realized something had shifted inside me. I wasn't thinking about proving anything to anyone back home. I wasn't trying to become someone my family would finally respect. I was just focused on doing the job well enough to keep my teammates alive and help those medical supplies reach people who desperately needed them. For the first time since joining the military, I wasn't performing for an audience. I was just being a soldier. And it felt like the most honest thing I'd ever done. The humanitarian convoy mission should have been routine. Escort duty for medical supplies heading to refugee camps. Important work, but not particularly dangerous compared to some of our other operations. That was before everything went sideways in ways that would define the rest of my military career. We moved out at dawn on March 15, 2021. Our reconnaissance team was part of a larger security detail protecting 3 trucks loaded with antibiotics, surgical supplies, and emergency medical equipment bound for a refugee camp housing displaced Syrian families near the Turkish border. The convoy included 2 Humvees with infantry squads, a reconnaissance vehicle, and a command truck with communications equipment. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had positioned our team as advanced scouts, traveling 800 meters ahead of the main convoy to identify potential threats before they became problems. Remember, Rodriguez briefed us before departure, we're not looking for a fight, we're making sure these supplies reach people who need them. Clean, simple mission. Everyone goes home. The route took us through mountainous terrain dotted with abandoned villages and checkpoints left over from earlier conflicts. It was beautiful country when you could ignore the bullet holes in buildings and the burned-out vehicles scattered along the roadside. For the first 3 hours, everything proceeded exactly as planned. We maintained our advanced position, reported clear roads back to the convoy commander, and watched the sun climb over ridge lines that looked like something from a National Geographic magazine. Then Specialist Chen spotted the roadblock. Movement ahead, she reported through our comm system. Looks like debris across the road. Natural rock slide or deliberately placed. I adjusted my scope and saw what she meant. A pile of boulders and concrete chunks completely blocked the narrow mountain road about 2 kilometers ahead. There was no way around it. Steep cliffs on one side, a precipitous drop on the other. Could be natural, suggested Corporal Washington. This terrain sees a lot of erosion. Rodriguez studied the obstruction through her binoculars. Maybe, but those rocks look too evenly placed. Mitchell, what do you see through that scope? I spent several minutes examining every detail of the roadblock and the surrounding terrain. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Sergeant, I've got tire tracks leading away from the debris pile, fresh ones. And there's something metallic reflecting sunlight in the rocks about 50 meters east of the road. Shit, Rodriguez muttered. IED, this is a trap. She immediately radioed the convoy commander. Falcon 6, this is Overwatch. We have a probable ambush situation ahead. Roadblock with possible explosives and hostile positioning. Recommend immediate halt and reassessment. The response crackled through our radio. Overwatch, Falcon 6. Can you confirm hostile intent? We're on a tight schedule, and these supplies are critical. Rodriguez looked at me. Mitchell, how sure are you about what you're seeing? I studied the scene again, noting details I'd been trained to recognize. The placement of the debris, the way certain rocks seemed to have been arranged rather than fallen naturally, the glint of metal that was positioned too perfectly to be accidental wreckage. 90%, Sergeant. This isn't natural. Someone set this up. Falcon 6, Overwatch confirms deliberate obstruction with high probability of hostile forces. Strongly recommend we find an alternate route. Negative, Overwatch. No alternate routes available, and we cannot delay this mission. Medical supplies are needed immediately at the refugee camp. Advance and clear the obstacle. Rodriguez closed her eyes for a moment. We all knew what that meant. We were going to have to approach a potential ambush site and either clear the roadblock or spring whatever trap was waiting for us. Roger, Falcon 6. Overwatch moving to clear. She turned to our team. Here's how this works. Mitchell and Chen, you're staying in Overwatch position with long-range eyes on the area. Washington and I will approach the roadblock on foot and determine if it can be cleared safely. Thompson, you maintain radio communication and be ready to call for support if this goes bad. As Rodriguez and Washington moved forward, I kept my scope trained on the surrounding terrain, searching for any sign of hostile forces. The metallic reflection I'd spotted earlier was definitely there, and now I could see it was part of what looked like an improvised explosive device tucked between the rocks. Sergeant, I have visual confirmation on an IED northwestern side of the debris pile approximately 30 meters from your position. Copy that. We see it too. Looks like a pressure plate trigger connected to what's probably an artillery shell. Professional work. That's when everything happened at once. Chen spotted muzzle flashes from concealed positions in the rocks above the road. Contact. Multiple shooters, elevated positions, grid reference. Her transmission was cut off by the sharp crack of rifle fire. Rounds started impacting around Rodriguez and Washington's position, kicking up dust and rock fragments. Taking fire! Taking fire! Rodriguez's voice came through the radio as she and Washington dove for cover behind the larger pieces of debris. I could see at least 4 muzzle flashes from different positions in the rocks above us. The insurgents had set up a classic L-shaped ambush, with the roadblock forcing vehicles into a kill zone where shooters had elevated positions and clear fields of fire. I count 4 shooters, I reported, positions marked. Do you want suppressive fire? Negative! You'll hit the IED and bring the whole mountainside down. We need precise shots, not volume. This was the moment my training either worked or got people killed. I'd qualified expert marksman in basic training and scored high in advanced marksmanship, but this was the first time I'd have to take aimed shots at human targets while my teammates were under fire. I steadied my rifle against a rock outcropping and acquired my first target, a shooter positioned about 200 meters uphill who had the best angle on Rodriguez and Washington's position. First target acquired, northwest ridge 200 meters, taking the shot. The recoil was familiar, but the knowledge that I'd just ended someone's life hit me like a physical blow. No time to process it, though. Rodriguez and Washington were still pinned down, and 3 more shooters were maintaining fire on their position. Target down, moving to second shooter. The next shot was harder. The target was partially concealed behind rocks, and I had to wait for him to expose enough of himself to ensure a clean hit. When he leaned out to fire on our position, I was ready. 2 down, 2 to go. But the remaining shooters had figured out where I was shooting from and started directing fire toward my position. Bullets cracked overhead and shattered rocks nearby, sending stone fragments flying. Chen had moved to a flanking position and engaged the third shooter, but she was using her carbine at long range, not ideal for precision work. I could see her rounds impacting near the target but not connecting. Chen, keep him busy. I'm taking the 4th shooter, then we'll combine fire on yours. The fourth target was the smartest of the group. He'd positioned himself in a deep crevice between rocks where he had good cover and concealment. But he'd made one mistake. His position gave him a limited field of fire, which meant he had to expose himself to engage our people. I waited. Patience had been drilled into me during reconnaissance training. Sometimes the most important thing you could do was nothing, until the right moment presented itself. When he leaned out to take another shot at Rodriguez, I was ready. 3 down. Chen and I combined fire on the last shooter's position. With 2 of us putting rounds into his cover, he couldn't maintain his position. When he tried to relocate, Chen's shot caught him. The entire engagement had lasted less than 4 minutes, but it felt like hours. "Clear! All targets down!" I reported. Rodriguez and Washington emerged from cover and began moving toward the IED. They used a controlled detonation to destroy the device, clearing the roadblock for the convoy to pass through. As the medical supplies continued toward their destination, Rodriguez approached my position. 4 confirmed kills, Mitchell. Clean shots, perfect timing. You saved our asses out there. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the reality of what had happened was settling in. I had killed 4 people. They'd been trying to kill my teammates and prevent medical supplies from reaching refugees, but they were still human beings who'd woken up that morning not knowing they'd die on a Syrian mountainside. "You okay?" Chen asked quietly. "I think so. It's just, this is real now, you know?" "Yeah," she said, "it's real, but you did the right thing. Those supplies we just protected? They're gonna save lives. Kids with infections, mothers with complications from childbirth, elderly people who need medications to stay alive. That's what you fought for today." The convoy commander's voice came through our radio. "Overwatch Falcon 6, outstanding work today. Your team prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of critical medical supplies. Well done." But the real validation came that evening, back at base, when Rodriguez submitted her after-action report. I read it later when she handed me a copy. Specialist Mitchell demonstrated exceptional marksmanship, tactical awareness, and decision-making under extreme pressure. Her accurate identification of the ambush setup prevented casualties among friendly forces. Her precise rifle work neutralized hostile forces while avoiding collateral damage to the mission objective. This soldier's actions directly contributed to the successful delivery of life-saving medical supplies to refugee populations. Recommend for commendation. As I sat in my bunk that night, I thought about calling home to tell my family what had happened. Not to brag or prove anything, but because for the first time since joining the military, I felt like I'd done something genuinely important, something that mattered in a concrete, measurable way. But then I remembered Jake's memes and Emma's dismissive comments, and Patricia's constant worry that I was just playing dress-up with dangerous toys. How do you explain to people who've never faced a life-or-death situation that you'd spent 4 minutes that morning balancing on the knife's edge between success and disaster? How do you tell them that your training, your judgment, and your marksmanship had literally saved lives without sounding like you're bragging or trying to be a hero? I decided to wait. There would be time to tell that story later when I could find the right words. What I didn't know was that Rodriguez's commendation recommendation would work its way up through the chain of command much faster than usual, and that the humanitarian convoy mission would become part of something much larger than any of us realized at the time. I also didn't know that my family's mockery was about to escalate in ways that would make their previous jokes seem gentle by comparison. 3 weeks after the convoy ambush, I made the mistake of calling home during what should have been a celebration. Our unit had just received word that the medical supplies we'd protected had reached the refugee camp successfully, treating over 200 people in critical condition. Children with pneumonia, mothers with postpartum complications, elderly refugees with diabetes, all alive because we'd done our job. Rodriguez had pulled me aside earlier that day with news that my commendation was being fast-tracked through the chain of command. "Word came down from battalion," she said. "They want to review this for something bigger than a standard commendation. Your actions might qualify for the Bronze Star." The Bronze Star. I barely let myself think about it. That was the kind of recognition reserved for genuine heroes, not someone like me who'd just done what she was trained to do. But sitting in the communication center that evening, listening to the dial tone as I called Patricia, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, pride that I wanted to share with my family. "Sarah, oh thank God, we've been so worried," Patricia answered on the second ring. "Are you safe? We saw on the news there was some kind of attack." "I'm fine, Mom. Actually, I wanted to tell you about something that happened. Our unit protected a medical convoy last week and— Well, that's nice, honey, but actually I need to talk to you about something else first." Her voice shifted to that tone I remembered from childhood lectures. "Jake showed me some things online that are very concerning." My stomach dropped. "What things?" "People are making comments about your service. Some of your high school friends are saying things that, well, they're not very flattering. Emma thinks you might be exaggerating your role over there." "Exaggerating how?" "Well, some people are saying that reconnaissance soldiers don't actually see combat, that you're probably just sitting in an office somewhere, filing reports." Emma looked it up, and she says most reconnaissance work is just paperwork. I sat in stunned silence, holding the phone against my ear like it was a foreign object. 3 weeks ago, I'd been lying on a mountainside, taking aimed shots at people who were trying to kill my teammates. I had their faces burned into my memory, the weight of 4 lives I'd taken to protect others, and my family thought I was filing paperwork. "Mom, that's not. Reconnaissance isn't office work. We go into hostile territory. We gather intelligence. Sometimes we have to fight." "Now, Sarah, don't get defensive. No one's questioning your service. We're just worried that you might be embellishing things. You know how you get when you want attention." That phrase hit me like a physical blow. How I get when I want attention? You've always had a tendency to make things sound more dramatic than they are. Remember in high school when you said you were being bullied, but it turned out to be normal teenage drama? Or when you claimed that nursing instructor was discriminating against you? I closed my eyes, remembering those incidents differently. The bullying had been real, systematic exclusion and harassment that had made my senior year miserable. The nursing instructor had been discriminating, giving me failing grades on assignments that other students with identical work had passed. But my family had dismissed both situations as me being overly dramatic. "This is different," I said quietly. "Is it?" Because Jake found some military forums where people were discussing reconnaissance work, and they said most of it is pretty routine. Sitting in safe positions, taking notes, radio work. Not exactly the dangerous missions you've been describing. Behind Patricia's voice, I could hear Jake laughing about something, probably scrolling through his phone. In the background, the TV was playing some reality show at high volume. Normal family evening sounds that felt completely disconnected from the reality of where I was and what I'd been doing. "Where did Jake find these forums?" I asked. "Oh, I don't know the technical details, but he's been doing research because he was worried people might think our family was exaggerating your service. You know how people talk in small towns." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, but I barely heard it. Patricia talked about Emma's wedding preparations, Jake's new job at a marketing firm, and Robert's retirement plans. Normal family updates that felt like news from another planet. When I hung up, I sat in the empty communication center for a long time, staring at the phone. Outside, I could hear the sounds of a military base at night. Generators humming, distant radio chatter, the occasional rumble of aircraft. Real sounds from a real place where real things happened. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I used the base's internet connection to look up what Jake had been researching. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. He hadn't just been looking up information about reconnaissance work. He had been actively participating in online discussions, posting questions about military service that were clearly designed to undermine my credibility. In a Reddit thread titled "How to Know If Someone is Lying About Military Service," Jake had posted, "My sister claims she's doing dangerous reconnaissance work in Syria, but I'm pretty sure she's exaggerating. She says she's been in firefights, but from what I've read, recon soldiers mostly just sit around taking pictures. How can I fact-check this without calling her out directly?" The responses were brutal. People shared stories of stolen valor cases. Others explained how to verify military service, and several commenters suggested that my family should be suspicious of anyone who talks up their service too much. One commenter had written, "Sounds like classic attention-seeking behavior. Real soldiers usually don't brag about combat. If she's talking about firefights and dangerous missions, she's probably embellishing or outright lying." Jake had responded, "That's what I thought. She's always been kind of dramatic, and now she's got an audience for her stories. I just don't want her to embarrass our family with fake war stories." Emma had joined the thread. "This is my sister too. We're all pretty skeptical. She's been posting photos in uniform on Facebook, but they look pretty staged. Like she's posing for a recruitment poster or something." I scrolled through dozens of comments, each one building a case against my credibility based on secondhand information and assumptions. My own family had created an online support group for people who thought I was lying about my military service. The worst part was how reasonable they sounded. They weren't attacking me maliciously. They genuinely believed they were being responsible family members, fact-checking my claims to prevent embarrassment or protect me from getting in trouble for exaggerating. But their fact-checking was based on Google searches and forum posts rather than actually asking me about my experiences. They'd decided I was lying and then looked for evidence to support that conclusion. I found more. Jake had created a private Instagram account called Sarah's War Stories, where he'd been posting screenshots of my messages home, adding sarcastic captions. One post showed a message I'd sent about completing advanced training, with Jake's caption, "Day 47. Sarah still thinks she's in Call of Duty." Another showed a photo I'd sent of our team after a successful mission, with the caption, "Look how hardcore my sister is in her army costume. Very intimidating." The account had 23 followers, including Emma, several cousins, and friends from high school. Each post had comments making jokes about my military phase and speculating about when I'd grow out of it. Emma had added her own post to the account, including a photo of me at Thanksgiving dinner with the caption, "Before she discovered she was a war hero, simpler times." I screenshot everything before the account went private. That evening, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez found me cleaning my rifle for the third time that day. "Something eating at you, Mitchell?" I showed her the forum threads, the Instagram account, the Reddit posts. She read through everything in silence, her expression growing darker with each screenshot. "Jesus Christ," she said finally, "your own family is running a disinformation campaign against you. They think they're being responsible. They think I'm lying about what we do here." Rodriguez set down my phone and looked at me directly. "Mitchell, 3 weeks ago you saved my life. You saved Washington's life. You made 4 confirmed kills in a tactical situation that could have gone sideways fast. You identified an IED that would have killed or maimed everyone in that convoy. You enabled the delivery of medical supplies that have already saved dozens of civilian lives." She paused, letting that sink in. "I've been doing this for 8 years, and I've seen soldiers crack under pressure, freeze up when it matters, and make mistakes that get people killed. You did none of those things. You performed like a seasoned combat veteran on your first real engagement." "But they think what they want to think," she interrupted. "And what they want to think is that nothing important happens outside their small world. That their daughter and sister couldn't possibly be competent at something they don't understand." She handed me back my phone. "You know what this is? This is them trying to cut you down to their size. They can't imagine that you've outgrown them, so they're trying to convince themselves, and everyone else, that you haven't actually grown at all." What am I supposed to do about it? Right now? Nothing. Keep doing your job, keep being the soldier I know you are, and let your record speak for itself. Because here's something they don't know. That commendation I mentioned, it just got upgraded. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "Battalion commander wants to see you tomorrow morning. Word is, you're being considered for the Bronze Star with Valor. That's not something they give out for filing paperwork." I stared at the paper, not quite believing what I was hearing. "But more than that," Rodriguez continued, "there's talk of pulling you into a special operations unit. They need people who can think under pressure and shoot straight when lives are on the line. People who can do the job when it matters." As she walked away, she called back over her shoulder, "Your family thinks you're playing soldier? Wait until they see what a real soldier looks like when she comes home." That night, I lay in my bunk, thinking about the Bronze Star, about special operations, about the possibility of a military career that would take me far beyond anything my family could dismiss or diminish. But mostly I thought about Jake's Instagram account and Emma's forum posts, and I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. They weren't trying to protect me from embarrassment or legal trouble. They were trying to protect themselves from the possibility that I might actually be becoming someone they couldn't control, someone whose achievements would make their own lives look small by comparison. The mockery wasn't about concern for my well-being. It was about their fear that I might actually succeed at something important. And that fear was about to become very, very justified. The meeting with Lieutenant Colonel Henderson changed everything. I'd expected a brief congratulations and maybe some paperwork to sign. Instead, I walked into his office to find 3 other officers I didn't recognize, a laptop displaying satellite imagery, and a stack of classified folders marked with my name. "Specialist Mitchell," Henderson began, gesturing for me to sit. "Your performance during the convoy operation has drawn attention from some very high places. We'd like to discuss your future." The officer to his left, a major wearing Special Forces tabs, leaned forward. "I'm Major Catherine Barnes, 5th Special Forces Group. We've been tracking your progress since basic training. High marks in marksmanship, exceptional performance under pressure, natural tactical instincts. But what really caught our attention was your decision-making during the ambush." She opened one of the folders. "Most soldiers in your position would have waited for orders, or taken suppressive fire to keep the enemy's heads down. You made 4 precision shots in a complex tactical environment while protecting civilian medical supplies. That's not just good shooting, that's strategic thinking under extreme stress." The third officer, a colonel whose nameplate read Davidson, spoke next. "We're forming a new joint task force. Small teams, high-value missions, working with allied forces across multiple theaters. We need people who can adapt quickly and operate independently." My head was spinning. 3 months ago, my family had been making jokes about my military phase. Now I was being recruited for special operations. "What exactly would this involve?" I asked. Major Barnes pulled out a tablet and showed me mission profiles. Direct action raids, hostage rescue, counter-terrorism operations, training allied forces. You'd be working with the best of the best. Navy SEALs, Delta Force, international special operations units. "But first," Colonel Davidson added, "you'd need to complete selection and additional training. It's intensive. Failure rate is about 60%. Lieutenant Colonel Henderson smiled. "The good news is, we're confident you can handle it. The better news is, if you succeed, you'll be part of something that could define your entire military career." I thought about Rodriguez's words, about proving myself, about the Bronze Star recommendation still working its way through the system. But mostly, I thought about Jake's Instagram posts and Emma's forum comments, about a family that couldn't imagine me succeeding at anything that mattered. When do I start? The next 6 months were the hardest of my life. Special operations selection pushed every limit I thought I had, then found new ones. Physical training that left me crawling to my bunk. Navigation exercises in hostile terrain with minimal equipment. Language training in Arabic and Kurdish. Advanced marksmanship that made my previous shooting look like amateur hour. But the mental challenges were worse. Sleep deprivation exercises designed to test decision-making under extreme fatigue. Leadership scenarios where there were no good options, only degrees of acceptable loss. Psychological evaluations that dug into every childhood trauma and personal weakness. 3 soldiers dropped out in the first week. By month 3, our class of 24 had been reduced to 9. By month 5, only 5 of us remained. I made it through by focusing on something Rodriguez had told me. They're not trying to break you down. They're trying to build you up strong enough for what comes next. During a brief leave between selection phases, I called home. Patricia answered, and for the first time in months, she sounded genuinely happy to hear from me. "Sarah, we've been worried sick. Jake said he hasn't seen any posts from you on social media in ages. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom. I've been in training." "Specialized stuff. I couldn't really communicate much." "Training for what? I thought you were already trained." I tried to explain special operations selection without revealing classified information. Patricia listened with what sounded like actual interest, asking questions about the physical requirements and timeline. That sounds very impressive, honey. Your father will be proud when I tell him. For a moment, I felt the old hope creeping back. Maybe they were finally beginning to understand what I was accomplishing. Then Jake's voice came through the background. Is that Sarah? Ask her if she's learned to fly helicopters yet. I told everyone at work she's basically Rambo now. The hope died as quickly as it had come. Even when Patricia tried to shush him, I could hear Jake continuing, What? I'm supporting her delusions. Very encouraging big brother behavior. Mom, is Jake still posting about me online? Oh, that. He took down that silly Instagram account after Emma said it might hurt your feelings. But he's been showing people your photos at work. He's very proud of you, in his way. Showing them how? Patricia's pause told me everything. Well, you know Jake, he likes to be entertaining, but it's all in good fun. After we hung up, I used the base computer to check Jake's social media. The Instagram account was gone, but he'd moved the content to TikTok. The videos were worse than the photos had been. One showed him reenacting my basic training graduation photo, complete with exaggerated saluting and a high-pitched voice saying, Look at me, I'm saving America. It had 847 likes and 23 shares. Another featured him reading portions of my letters home in the same mocking voice, adding commentary like, Translation, Sarah spent another day pretending to be important. The newest video showed him wearing a military surplus helmet and vest holding a toy rifle, while text on screen read, My sister thinks this makes her a war hero. Should I tell her it's just dress up? Emma had shared every single video. But something had changed in me during selection training. The old hurt was still there, but it was buried under layers of genuine confidence I'd earned through accomplishment rather than approval. I screenshot the videos, not for evidence or confrontation, but for my own records. Someday, I thought, it might be interesting to look back on what my family thought I was capable of, versus what I actually achieved. 2 weeks later, I graduated from Special Operations Selection, 5 of us out of the original 24. The ceremony was small, attended mostly by instructors and a few family members of other graduates. Major Barnes presented us with our new assignments. You're now part of Task Force Sentinel. Your first deployment will be to Iraq, working with Kurdish forces to eliminate ISIS leadership cells still operating in remote areas. She handed me my new orders. Congratulations, Sergeant Mitchell. Sergeant, I had been promoted during selection, though the paperwork had been so classified that I hadn't known until that moment. Your Bronze Star came through as well, she added quietly. With Valor device. It'll be presented when you return from this deployment. The Bronze Star with Valor. The recognition given for heroic or meritorious achievement during combat operations. I stood there holding my orders, feeling the weight of how far I'd come from the person who'd sat at that Thanksgiving dinner listening to her family mock her decision to serve. Task Force Sentinel's first mission took us deep into the Iraqi desert, working alongside Kurdish Peshmerga forces to track down a high-value target, an ISIS commander responsible for coordinating attacks on civilian populations and military installations across the region. Our team consisted of myself, 2 Navy SEALs, a Delta Force operator, and a Marine Force reconnaissance specialist. We were embedded with a Kurdish unit led by a woman named Captain Rojin, who had been fighting ISIS for 6 years, and knew the terrain better than any satellite imagery could show. This target, Captain Rojin explained during our briefing, has been responsible for at least 40 civilian deaths in the past year. Mostly families trying to return to their homes after ISIS was driven out of the cities. He sets up checkpoints, demands payment for safe passage, kills anyone who refuses. The mission required a complex infiltration through hostile territory, followed by a precision raid on a compound where intelligence indicated the target would be meeting with his lieutenants. For 3 days we moved through desert terrain, avoiding enemy patrols and drone surveillance. My job was to provide overwatch during the assault, positioning myself on high ground with clear sightlines to the target building. When the raid began at 0347 hours, everything went according to plan for exactly 90 seconds. Our assault team breached the compound, engaged the guards, and began clearing rooms methodically. Then the target's reinforcements arrived, 2 truckloads of fighters who had been positioned in a nearby village as backup. From my overwatch position, I could see the tactical situation changing rapidly. The assault team was now trapped inside the compound, taking fire from multiple directions, with enemy reinforcements closing in on their exit routes. "Overwatch to ground team," I radioed. "You've got approximately 15 hostiles converging on your position from the northeast. 2 more vehicles approaching from the village." "Copy, Overwatch. Can you provide support?" What followed was the most intense 40 minutes of sustained combat I'd ever experienced. Using my sniper rifle and the high ground advantage, I engaged targets that threatened the assault team's escape routes. When the team finally extracted with the high-value target in custody, Captain Rogin's after-action report credited my Overwatch fire with preventing what could have been a catastrophic loss of American and Kurdish lives. Sergeant Mitchell's precision fire and tactical awareness enabled the successful completion of this mission, she wrote. Her actions directly contributed to the elimination of a significant terrorist threat and the safety of all friendly forces involved. The target we captured provided intelligence that led to 3 more successful operations over the following month. Each mission built on the previous one, dismantling an entire ISIS network that had been terrorizing the region. By the time our deployment ended, Task Force Sentinel had eliminated 12 high-value targets and disrupted dozens of planned terrorist attacks. My role in these operations earned me a second commendation and a reputation within special operations circles, as someone who could be counted on when things went sideways. During our final briefing before returning to the States, Major Barnes pulled me aside. "Sergeant Mitchell, you've exceeded every expectation we had when we recruited you. Your performance has been exceptional, and I want you to know that doors are opening for you that most soldiers never even see." She handed me a folder marked "Confidential." "There's a position available with a joint international task force based in Germany. Counterterrorism operations across multiple theaters, working with allied special operations units. It's a career-making opportunity." I opened the folder and saw mission profiles that looked like something from a movie. Operations and locations I'd only heard about in intelligence briefings, working with elite units from countries around the world. "The downside," she continued, "is that it would mean extended deployments. Minimal contact with home. Your family would basically have to understand that your military career comes first." I thought about my family, about Jake's TikTok videos and Emma's forum posts, about Patricia's assumption that I was exaggerating everything I'd accomplished. "When do I start?" I asked. Major Barnes smiled. "First, you go home for 30 days leave. Get your Bronze Star presentation, spend some time with family, then report to Germany for orientation." About that Bronze Star ceremony, I said, "Can I have it presented at the local VFW hall in my hometown? I want my family to see it." She raised an eyebrow. "That's unusual, but it can be arranged. Any particular reason?" I thought about Jake calling me G.I. Joke and Emma dismissing my service as playing dress-up. Let's just say I want to clear up some misconceptions. The flight back to the United States felt surreal. I was wearing my dress uniform, Bronze Star ribbon already in place along with my other decorations, Combat Action Badge, Army Commendation Medal, Iraq Campaign Medal, and the newest addition, the Special Operations tab, that marked me as part of an elite community most people never even knew existed. The soldier sitting next to me was returning from his first deployment, nervous about seeing his family after 8 months away. He kept asking questions about readjusting to civilian life, about whether people back home would understand what we'd been through. "My biggest worry," he said, "is that my family won't recognize who I've become. Like, they'll still see me as the kid who left, not the soldier coming back." I almost laughed. My problem was the exact opposite. My family would refuse to recognize who I'd become, no matter what evidence I presented. During our layover in Frankfurt, I checked my phone for the first time in 2 months. The message notifications went on for pages. Most were from military colleagues congratulating me on the Bronze Star and the Special Operations assignment. A few were from high school friends who'd somehow heard about my awards. But buried among them were dozens of notifications from social media platforms where Jake had tagged me in his latest videos. The content had evolved during my deployment. He'd created an entire series called Sarah's War Chronicles that dramatized my letters home with increasingly ridiculous interpretations. One video showed him reading my message about completing special operations selection while wearing a tiara and fairy wings, implying that my military achievements were as fictional as a fairy tale. Another featured him and Emma doing a mock interview where they discussed how to handle a family member who's lost touch with reality. The newest video was different, though. Jake was sitting in what looked like a therapist's office, speaking directly to the camera with uncharacteristic seriousness. "So my sister Sarah has been deployed for over a year now," he began, "and she's been sending these increasingly elaborate stories about special missions and medals and working with elite units. At first, we thought it was just her usual tendency to exaggerate, but now we're genuinely concerned about her mental health." He paused for effect, letting the camera capture his expression of concerned confusion. "She claims she's won something called a Bronze Star and been promoted to sergeant, but when we try to verify any of this through official channels, we hit dead ends. The military won't confirm specific details about individual soldiers, which makes it impossible to fact-check her stories." Emma appeared on camera, sitting beside Jake with the same artificially concerned expression. "We've been researching PTSD and combat stress reactions," she said, "and one symptom is grandiose delusions about one's role in military operations. Sarah might genuinely believe these things happened, even if they didn't." Jake nodded gravely. "We're planning an intervention when she comes home. We love her, but we can't enable these fantasies anymore. She needs professional help to separate reality from whatever she's constructed in her mind." The video had over 2,000 views and 150 comments, most of them praising Jake and Emma for their compassion and responsible approach to handling a family member's mental health crisis. I screenshot the video and forwarded it to Major Barnes with a brief message. "This is why I requested the hometown ceremony." Her response came back within an hour. "Jesus Christ, Mitchell, your family is something else. Don't worry. We'll make sure the presentation is thorough enough to clear up any confusion about whether your service record is real." 3 days later, I landed at Chicago O'Hare. Patricia was waiting at the gate, holding a small, "Welcome Home Sarah" sign, and wearing the same nervous smile she'd had when I left for basic training 3 years earlier. The hug felt strange. She seemed smaller than I remembered, more fragile. Or maybe I'd just gotten used to being around people who carried themselves with the confidence that comes from knowing they can handle whatever life throws at them. "You look different," she said, studying my uniform and decorations. "More serious." "It's been a serious few years, Mom." During the drive home, she filled me in on family news. Emma's wedding was in 6 months. Jake had gotten a promotion at his marketing firm. Robert had retired and was spending most of his time working on classic cars in the garage. "And how has everyone been handling my deployment?" I asked carefully. Patricia shifted uncomfortably. "Well, you know how families worry. We've all been concerned about you, especially after some of the stories you've been telling us." "Stories?" "The combat situations, the special missions." Jake showed us some things online about how military personnel sometimes exaggerate their experiences. Not intentionally, but because of stress and trauma. We were already setting up the narrative that would let them dismiss everything I'd accomplished as symptoms of mental illness rather than evidence of competence they'd underestimated. "Mom, did you ever consider that maybe the stories are true?" "Oh, honey, I'm sure parts of them are. But some of the things you've described, they sound like something from a movie." Jake looked up statistics about how many soldiers actually see combat, and it's a very small percentage. What if I'm part of that small percentage? She patted my knee with the same condescending gentleness I remembered from childhood. "We'll figure it all out together. The important thing is that you're safe and home." The house looked exactly the same, but I felt like an alien visiting from another planet. The furniture, the decorations, the familiar smells, everything was precisely as I'd left it, as if time had stopped while I was gone. Jake came bounding down the stairs, phone already in his hand to document my arrival. "There she is! The conquering hero returns!" His tone was that same mocking enthusiasm I remembered from Thanksgiving 3 years earlier. "Hey, Jake. So tell me everything. What was it like being a elite Special Forces operative? Did you get to use any cool spy gadgets, meet any famous generals?" He was baiting me, trying to get me to say something he could later use as evidence of delusions or exaggeration. I recognized the technique because we'd used similar approaches during interrogations, asking leading questions designed to make the subject reveal information they shouldn't have. It was a job, I said simply. I did what I was trained to do. Come on, you can't give me that boring answer. Your letters home were way more exciting. Tell me about the special missions, the medals, the dangerous operations behind enemy lines. Emma appeared from the kitchen, Derek behind her carrying a bottle of wine like they were arriving at a dinner party rather than greeting a returning soldier. Sarah, oh my God, you look so military. She hugged me awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with my uniform and bearing. We've been so worried about you. Jake showed us some things that made us think you might be having a hard time processing your experiences. What things? Well, some of your letters home described situations that seemed unlikely for someone in your position. We understand that deployment can be stressful, and sometimes people cope by creating narratives that make them feel more important. Derek nodded sagely. It's actually pretty common among veterans. The transition from military structure back to civilian life can cause identity issues and compensatory behaviors. I looked around at my family, people I'd once desperately wanted to impress, whose approval I'd craved for most of my life. Now they were speaking about me like I was a psychiatric case study rather than a decorated combat veteran. Where's Dad? I asked. Garage, Patricia said. He's been working on that old Mustang since he retired. I'm sure he'll be excited to see you. I found Robert hunched over the engine compartment, tools scattered across a workbench that looked like it hadn't been organized since the 1980s. He looked up when I entered, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that might have been respect. Sarah, you look good, professional. Thanks, Dad. He wiped his hands on a rag and really looked at me for the first time since I'd joined the military. His eyes took in my uniform, the ribbons, the Special Operations tab, the combat decorations. Those ribbons, he said quietly, that Bronze Star, that's real? Yes, sir. Earned it during a convoy operation in Syria. 4 confirmed kills protecting medical supplies for refugee camps. Robert was quiet for a long moment. As a Vietnam veteran, he understood military decorations in ways the rest of my family couldn't. Bronze Star with Valor, he read from my ribbon rack. That's significant. Combat decoration, you can't fake that. No, sir, you can't. And this tab here, Special Operations. That's not something they hand out. You have to earn that through selection and training. 60% failure rate, I confirmed. 6 months of the hardest training I've ever done. Robert set down his tools and looked at me with something I'd never seen before. Not pride, exactly, but recognition. One soldier acknowledging another. Your mother and Jake and Emma, he said carefully, they've been saying things. About your letters home, about whether what you've been telling us is accurate. I know. Are they wrong? I pulled out my phone and showed him the citation that had come with my Bronze Star award. He read it slowly, his expression growing more serious with each line. Holy shit, he whispered. Sarah, this says you saved multiple lives during an ambush. 4 enemy KIA, protected civilian medical supplies, enabled successful mission completion under heavy fire. That's correct. He looked at my Special Operations tab again, then back at the citation. How many missions have you been on? I can't discuss specific numbers or details, but my unit has been very active in counter-terrorism operations across multiple theaters. Robert was quiet for several minutes, processing what I'd told him. Finally, he spoke. They don't believe any of it, do they? No, they think I'm having some kind of mental breakdown and making up stories to feel important. Jesus Christ, he shook his head. Sarah, I know what combat decorations mean. I know what Special Operations selection involves. This isn't something you can fake or exaggerate. This is real achievement. I know, Dad, but they've convinced themselves that I'm lying, and they're trying to convince everyone else. Robert leaned against his workbench, looking older than his 62 years. I should have said something earlier. When they started making jokes about your service, I should have shut it down. I know better. Why didn't you? Because I was a coward, he said simply. I didn't want to deal with your mother being angry at me for taking sides. But watching them tear down my daughter's actual accomplishments to protect their own egos, that's not something I can stay quiet about anymore. We stood in the garage surrounded by tools and car parts and the smell of motor oil, two soldiers from different generations finally understanding each other. "There's going to be a ceremony," I said. "Bronze Star presentation at the VFW Hall downtown. The whole family's invited." Robert smiled for the first time since I'd been home. "Good. It's about time people in this town learned what you've actually been doing over there." "You think they'll show up?" "Oh, they'll show up," he said grimly. "They wouldn't miss the chance to publicly support their troubled daughter who needs help separating fantasy from reality." "What they don't know," I said, "is that Major Barnes is flying in personally to present the award, along with my company commander and the Kurdish officer who wrote the recommendation." Robert's grin widened. "This is going to be interesting." Outside the garage, I could hear Jake's voice carrying across the backyard as he made another TikTok video, probably about my dramatic homecoming and elaborate uniform costume. In 48 hours, that same voice would be significantly quieter. The VFW hall had been transformed for the ceremony. American flags lined the walls, and rows of folding chairs faced a small stage where a podium and microphone had been set up. What I hadn't expected was the crowd. Nearly 200 people had shown up, including local news crews and reporters from 3 different papers. Major Barnes had arrived that morning along with Lieutenant Colonel Henderson and, to my complete surprise, Captain Rojin, the Kurdish officer who had recommended me for the Bronze Star. She'd flown in from Iraq specifically for the ceremony. "This is bigger than I expected," I told Major Barnes as we reviewed the program in a side room. "Word got out that we were presenting a Bronze Star with valor to a local soldier," she explained. "The media loves these stories, especially when it involves someone from a small town who's done something extraordinary." Through the window, I could see people filing into the hall. Veterans from multiple conflicts, active duty personnel from the nearby Army Reserve Center, local officials, and scattered throughout the crowd, faces I recognized from high school and around town. Near the back, I spotted my family. Patricia wore her best dress and the expression of someone attending a funeral for appearance's sake. Emma and Derek sat beside her, both looking uncomfortable and checking their phones frequently. Jake had positioned himself where he could film the proceedings, probably planning to add commentary later about my elaborate fantasy. But Robert sat in the front row, wearing his old army dress uniform from Vietnam. The ribbons on his chest told their own story of service and sacrifice, and for the first time in my life I understood why he'd never talked much about his war. The ceremony began with the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by remarks from the local VFW commander about the importance of recognizing heroes in our community. Then Major Barnes took the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today to honor Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, a soldier whose actions during combat operations in Syria exemplify the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon herself, her unit, and the United States Army." She paused, letting her words sink in across the crowded hall. "The Bronze Star Medal with Valor device is awarded for heroic or meritorious achievement or service during combat operations against an armed enemy. It is not awarded lightly, and it is not awarded for routine service. What Sergeant Mitchell did on March 15, 2021 was anything but routine." I could see Jake in the back, no longer filming, his phone lowered to his lap as he listened with a confused expression. Major Barnes continued, reading from the official citation. "On the 15th of March 2021, Sergeant Mitchell was serving as a reconnaissance specialist with a security detachment protecting a humanitarian convoy carrying critical medical supplies to Syrian refugee camps. When the convoy encountered a sophisticated ambush involving improvised explosive devices and multiple enemy fighters in elevated positions, Sergeant Mitchell's quick thinking and exceptional marksmanship prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of life." She looked directly at me before continuing. "Under heavy enemy fire, Sergeant Mitchell identified and neutralized 4 enemy combatants, while simultaneously providing tactical intelligence that enabled the safe passage of medical supplies to over 200 displaced civilians, including children suffering from pneumonia and mothers with life-threatening birth complications." The hall was completely silent now. Even Emma had stopped checking her phone. But that was just the beginning of Sergeant Mitchell's exceptional service record. Major Barnes gestured to Lieutenant Colonel Henderson, who joined her at the podium. Following her performance during the convoy operation, Henderson said, Sergeant Mitchell was selected for Special Operations Training, a program with a 60% failure rate that produces some of our military's most elite soldiers. She not only completed this training successfully, but graduated in the top 10% of her class. I saw Patricia's face change, the polite skepticism being replaced by something that might have been shock. As part of Task Force Sentinel, a joint special operations unit, Sergeant Mitchell participated in 12 classified missions across multiple theaters of operation. Her precision marksmanship and tactical expertise contributed to the elimination of high-value terrorist targets and the disruption of networks responsible for attacks on civilian populations. Henderson paused, scanning the crowd. To put this in perspective, fewer than 2% of military personnel ever see direct combat. Less than 1% receive combat decorations like the Bronze Star. And significantly less than 1% are selected for special operations. Sergeant Mitchell has achieved all three. Now Captain Roshan took the podium, speaking in accented but clear English. I am Captain Roshan Khalil of the Kurdish Peshmerga forces. I have been fighting ISIS and other terrorist groups for 6 years. I have worked with American soldiers, British SAS, French Special Forces, and many others. Sergeant Mitchell is among the finest soldiers I have ever served alongside. She looked directly at me. When my men and I were pinned down during the raid on the ISIS compound, it was Sergeant Mitchell's Overwatch fire that kept us alive. Her precision shooting eliminated multiple threats and enabled us to complete our mission. Because of her actions, we captured intelligence that led to the prevention of terrorist attacks and saved many innocent lives. The weight of her words settled over the hall like a blanket. This wasn't just American military officials praising one of their own. This was a foreign officer, someone who had no reason to exaggerate, testifying to my competence and courage. Captain Roshan continued, In my culture we have a saying, the warrior's worth is proven in battle, not in words. Sergeant Mitchell has proven her worth many times over. She is a true warrior, and I am honored to call her my sister-in-arms. Major Barnes returned to the podium for the actual presentation. Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, by order of the President of the United States and the Secretary of the Army, you are hereby awarded the Bronze Star Medal with Valor Device for heroic achievement in connection with combat operations against an armed enemy of the United States. As she pinned the medal to my uniform, the hall erupted in applause. Veterans stood and saluted, civilians clapped and cheered. Camera flashes went off from multiple directions. But I was looking at my family in the back row. Patricia sat frozen, her face pale, finally understanding that every story she'd dismissed as exaggeration had been true. Emma stared at me like she was seeing a stranger, the sister she thought she knew, replaced by someone she'd never bothered to understand. Jake's phone lay forgotten in his lap, his expression cycling through confusion, embarrassment, and something that might have been shame. Only Robert was smiling, tears streaming down his face as he rendered a perfect military salute. After the ceremony, people crowded around to congratulate me and ask questions about my service. Local veterans shared their own stories, thanking me for carrying on the tradition of service. High school teachers I barely remembered expressed pride that one of their former students had achieved something so significant. But the people I really wanted to talk to were hanging back, uncertain how to approach me now that they understood who I'd actually become. Patricia was the first to reach me, her eyes red from crying. Sarah, we had no idea. The things you wrote home about, they seemed so... She struggled for words. We thought you were exaggerating because you wanted us to be proud of you. I never needed to exaggerate, Mom. I needed you to believe in me. Emma appeared beside her, Derek nowhere to be seen. I'm so sorry, she whispered. We thought we were protecting you from embarrassment. We thought you were making things up to feel important. Instead of asking me directly, you decided I was lying, and then looked for evidence to support that conclusion. Jake approached last, his usual swagger completely absent. Sarah, I'm so sorry. The videos, the posts, the jokes, I had no idea you were actually... Actually what, Jake? Actually a goddamn war hero. He looked down at his feet. I made you look like a joke when you were out there risking your life for real. You made me look like a joke because you couldn't imagine your little sister being capable of anything important. The conversation was interrupted by a reporter from the local newspaper who wanted to interview me about my service and future plans. As I spoke with her, I noticed my family huddled together near the exit, having what looked like an intense discussion. After the interviews, I found them in the parking lot. The dynamics had shifted completely. Instead of the confident dismissal I'd faced for 3 years, they looked uncertain, almost afraid to speak. We need to talk, Patricia said quietly. All of us. We need to figure out how to fix this. Fix what, exactly? The way we treated you, the things we said, the assumptions we made. She took a shaky breath. We were wrong about everything. Jake stepped forward, his phone in his hand. I've been deleting the videos. All of them. The TikTok account, the Instagram stuff, the Reddit posts. It's all coming down. That's a start. Emma was crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks. We made you into a joke when you were actually, God, Sarah, you saved lives. Real people are alive because of what you did over there. Multiple people, I corrected. The convoy mission, the counter-terrorism operations, the intelligence that prevented attacks. The Kurdish captain wasn't exaggerating when she said I'd saved innocent lives. Patricia looked like she might collapse. How do we apologize for something like this? How do we make up for 3 years of not believing in you? I looked at my family, people who had shaped my entire understanding of myself, who had convinced me I was someone who never finished anything important, who had mocked my greatest achievements and turned them into entertainment for strangers. But I also saw people who were genuinely horrified by their own behavior, who were beginning to understand the magnitude of what they'd dismissed. You start, I said finally, by understanding that I don't need your approval anymore. I spent 3 years proving myself to people who chose not to see what I was accomplishing. I'm done with that. Robert appeared beside us, still wearing his dress uniform. What your daughter is trying to tell you, he said to Patricia, is that she's outgrown this family. She's become someone bigger than what we expected, and instead of celebrating that, we tried to cut her down to our size. He looked at Jake and Emma. You want to make this right? Start by understanding that Sarah doesn't owe you forgiveness. She doesn't owe you a relationship. She's given you 3 years of chances to see who she really is, and you chose to see what was comfortable for you instead. Patricia was sobbing now. We're your family. We're supposed to be the people who believe in you no matter what. You're supposed to be, I agreed, but you weren't. When I needed support, you gave me mockery. When I achieved something extraordinary, you turned it into a joke. When I earned recognition for genuine heroism, you decided I was having a mental breakdown. I gestured toward the VFW hall, where people were still filing out, many stopping to look at our group with curiosity. Today, 200 strangers showed up to honor what I've accomplished. My own family spent 3 years trying to convince people it was all fake. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of years of dismissal and misunderstanding. Finally, Jake spoke up. What can we do? How do we fix this? I looked at each of them. Patricia with her tear-streaked makeup, Emma with her shoulders shaking from silent sobs, Jake with his phone clutched like a foreign object he no longer knew how to use, and Robert standing apart from them with the bearing of someone who understood the gravity of what had happened. You can start, I said, by figuring out how to be proud of me without needing me to be smaller than I am. Because I'm not the person who left for basic training 3 years ago. I'm not the sister who sat at that Thanksgiving table listening to you mock my decision to serve. I straightened my uniform, feeling the weight of the Bronze Star on my chest. I'm Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, Bronze Star recipient, Special Operations qualified, combat veteran with multiple deployments and classified achievements you'll never know about. I've saved lives, eliminated terrorist threats, and earned recognition from the highest levels of military leadership. The wind picked up, rustling the American flags that lined the VFW parking lot. The question isn't whether you can accept who I've become, the question is whether I can accept who you've chosen to be. The newspaper article came out 3 days later. Front page of the local paper, with a photo of me receiving the Bronze Star, and a headline that read, "Local Hero Returns, Hometown Soldier Honored for Valor in Combat Operations." The article detailed my service record, quoted Major Barnes and Captain Rogine extensively, and included a sidebar explaining the significance of Special Operations selection and combat decorations. What it didn't mention was my family's 3-year campaign to convince everyone that my service was fictional. The reporter had been professional enough not to include that angle. But in a town of 15,000 people, word travels fast. I was staying at a hotel downtown rather than at the family house, a decision that had caused another round of tears from Patricia, but felt necessary for my own sanity. On the morning the article appeared, my phone started ringing before I was fully awake. The first call was from my high school principal, congratulating me and asking if I'd consider speaking to current students about military service and achievement. The second was from the local American Legion post, inviting me to join as an honorary member. The third was from a veterans organization that supported female combat veterans, asking if I'd be willing to share my story at their annual conference. But scattered among the congratulations and invitations were calls from people who had seen Jake's social media posts over the past 3 years. Apologies, mostly from high school classmates who admitted they'd been confused by the conflicting narratives about my service. "I saw those videos your brother posted," said Michelle, who'd been in my chemistry class senior year. "But then I saw the ceremony coverage on the news and I realized, God, Sarah, we had no idea you were actually doing all that stuff. Some of us thought maybe you were just exaggerating for social media attention." That conversation was repeated a dozen times over the next few days. People who'd been exposed to Jake's mockery but hadn't known me well enough to question it directly were now trying to understand how they'd been so thoroughly misled. The most interesting call came from Derek, Emma's fiancé, who seemed to be having his own crisis of understanding. "Sarah, I owe you a massive apology," he said, his usual condescending tone replaced by something approaching humility. "I made assumptions about your service based on incomplete information, and I said things that were completely wrong. You said I was basically on welfare with a uniform. Yeah, that was ignorant. I had no idea what military service actually involved, especially at your level. I've been reading about special operations since the ceremony, and what you accomplished is genuinely extraordinary. What changed your mind?" Emma showed me the full citation for your Bronze Star, and the statistics about how few people are selected for special operations. The failure rates, the training requirements, the mission profiles. He paused. "I work in tech, so I understand achievement metrics. What you've done would be like getting hired by Google, Apple, and Microsoft simultaneously while also winning a Pulitzer Prize." It was a clumsy analogy, but I could hear him trying to process my achievements through a framework he understood. "The thing is," he continued, "Emma's been doing research too, and she found out that Jake had been actively discouraging people from taking your letters seriously. He wasn't just making jokes, he was running a deliberate disinformation campaign." That was new information. "What do you mean?" "He'd been contacting people who commented positively on your Facebook posts, telling them privately that you were exaggerating and that the family was concerned about your mental health. Emma found message threads going back 2 years where he was essentially convincing people that your service record was fantasy. I sat in my hotel room, looking out at the small downtown where I'd grown up, processing the idea that Jake had been actively sabotaging my reputation for years. Why are you telling me this? Because Emma's horrified. She thought the social media stuff was just harmless teasing, but this was systematic character assassination. She wants to make it right, but she doesn't know how. And what do you think she should do? Derek was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I think she should accept that she might have permanently damaged her relationship with her sister and focus on not making it worse. That afternoon I met Robert at a coffee shop downtown. He was out of uniform now, wearing civilian clothes, but he still carried himself like the soldier he'd once been. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm fine. This is actually easier than deployment stress." He smiled grimly. "Your mother's not handling it well. She's been crying for 3 days straight, alternating between guilt about not believing you and anger at Jake for misleading the family." "And Jake?" "Jake's in full damage control mode. He's been calling everyone who saw his videos, trying to explain that he was misguided, and that you're actually a genuine war hero. It's painful to watch. Robert stirred his coffee slowly, organizing his thoughts. I need to tell you something that I should have said years ago. When you first joined the military, I was proud but scared. Proud because you were choosing to serve, scared because I knew what that could mean. Why didn't you say anything? Because your mother was terrified you'd get killed, and she was dealing with that fear by convincing herself that what you were doing wasn't actually dangerous. If I'd validated your service, it would have made her fear more real. He looked out the window at the main street where we'd both grown up. But watching Jake and Emma turn your achievements into entertainment, and watching you handle their mockery with more grace than they deserved, I realized I was letting my fear of conflict with your mother prevent me from supporting my daughter. Dad, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because you deserved better from all of us. But especially from me. I knew what military decorations meant. I knew what special operations selection involved. I should have shut down their jokes the first time they made them. We sat in silence for a few minutes, two veterans from different generations finally having the conversation we should have had years earlier. What happens now? He asked. I report to Germany in 2 weeks, International Counterterrorism Task Force. It's a career-making assignment. And your mother? Jake and Emma? I thought about Patricia's tears, Jake's frantic damage control efforts, Emma's research into military service that had come 3 years too late. I don't know, Dad. Part of me wants to forgive them and move on. But another part of me thinks that would just teach them that their actions don't have real consequences. Robert nodded. What would help you decide? Time. Distance. The chance to build a life and career where people judge me based on what I do rather than what they think I'm capable of. That sounds healthy. The thing is, I used to need their approval so badly that I would have taken any scraps of recognition they offered. Now I realize that their approval or disapproval doesn't actually affect who I am or what I've accomplished. That evening, I met with Major Barnes for dinner at the hotel restaurant. She was flying back to base the next morning, and we needed to finalize details for my transfer to Germany. How are you feeling about everything? She asked. Relieved, mostly. It's nice to have the record set straight. And your family situation? I told her about the conversations with Derek, the attempts at apology, Jake's damage control efforts, and my own uncertainty about how to move forward. Here's something I've learned in 15 years of military service, she said. The people who matter will believe in you before you've proven anything. The people who don't matter will question your achievements, even after you've proven everything. Which category does family fall into? That depends on the family. Some families are in the privilege of being important in your life, others just assume they deserve it because of genetics. She leaned back in her chair, choosing her words carefully. The assignment in Germany is going to be intense. You'll be working with elite units from multiple countries on operations that could define your entire career. You need to be focused on that, not on managing family drama. I know. But you also need to understand that success at your level comes with a cost. The better you get at this job, the more distance there will be between you and people who've never experienced what you do. That includes family members who can't or won't understand the world you operate in. She was right. The conversations I'd had since the ceremony had made it clear that the gap between my military experience and my family's civilian perspective was wider than I'd realized. The question you need to answer, Major Barnes continued, is whether you want relationships based on who you used to be or who you've become. The next week passed in a blur of preparations. I spent time with local veterans groups, sharing my story and encouraging young people to consider military service. I gave interviews to regional newspapers and a military magazine about women in special operations. But I also spent hours walking through the town where I'd grown up, visiting places that had shaped my childhood and adolescence. The high school where teachers had seen me as an average student. The park where I'd played as a kid, dreaming about adventures I could barely imagine. The library where I'd read books about far-off places and wondered if I'd ever see them. None of these places had changed, but I saw them differently now. They weren't the boundaries of my world anymore. They were just the starting point of a journey that had taken me to places and experiences beyond anything I could have imagined when I was 17 and uncertain about my future. 2 days before I left for Germany, the family requested one final dinner together. Patricia had made reservations at the nicest restaurant in town, the same place they'd celebrated Emma's college graduation and Jake's promotion at work. As I got ready for dinner, I realized that this would be the first family meal since that Thanksgiving 3 years ago, where I wasn't hoping for their approval or dreading their mockery. I was simply curious about who we'd all become. The conversation that followed would determine whether my family remained part of my life or became part of my past. But for the first time since I'd put on a uniform, that outcome felt entirely up to them. I had outgrown the need for their validation. The question was whether they had outgrown the need to diminish me to feel better about themselves. We were about to find out. The restaurant felt different this time. 3 years ago, I'd sat at family dinners hoping someone would ask about my training, my goals, my reasons for serving. Tonight, I walked in knowing that conversation was no longer necessary. They'd already heard everything they needed to know from Major Barnes, Captain Rogine, and Lieutenant Colonel Henderson. The table was set for 5. Patricia had clearly spent considerable time on her appearance. Her best dress, carefully applied makeup that couldn't quite hide the evidence of recent crying. Emma sat beside her, fidgeting with her engagement ring, while Derek looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Jake was already seated when I arrived, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something I'd never seen before: genuine humility. Robert stood when I entered, and for a moment the gesture felt like the military courtesy it was, one soldier acknowledging another. "Sarah," Patricia began before I'd even sat down, "we wanted to have this dinner because we need to say some things that should have been said a long time ago." I took my seat, noting that they'd positioned themselves as if this were an intervention, all of them on one side of the table, me alone on the other. But the power dynamic had shifted completely since our last family gathering. This time, they were the ones seeking something from me. "First," she continued, her voice shaky, "we owe you an apology that goes beyond anything we've already said. What we did to you, the mockery, the dismissal, the public humiliation, it was cruel and wrong, and there's no excuse for it." Emma leaned forward, tears already forming. "Sarah, I found out things about what Jake was doing that I didn't know before. The messages to your friends, the systematic campaign to undermine your credibility. I thought it was just family teasing, but it was character assassination." Jake looked physically sick. "I've been trying to contact everyone who saw those posts, everyone I sent private messages to, trying to explain that I was completely wrong about everything. But some damage can't be undone." "Why?" I asked simply. "Why did you work so hard to convince people I was lying?" Jake stared at his hands. "Because admitting you were telling the truth would have meant admitting that you'd become someone extraordinary, and I couldn't handle being the mediocre brother of a war hero." The honesty was unexpected. For 3 years, I'd assumed their mockery came from genuine disbelief. Learning that it stemmed from jealousy and insecurity was somehow worse. I was 25 years old, living in my parents' basement, working a job I hated, and watching my little sister become everything I'd never had the courage to be, he continued. "It was easier to tear you down than to build myself up." Patricia reached across the table toward me, though I didn't take her hand. "We failed you in every way that mattered. Instead of being proud of your achievements, we tried to diminish them. Instead of supporting you through difficult deployments, we made jokes about your experiences. Instead of celebrating your success, we turned it into entertainment. The worst part," Emma added, "is that we convinced ourselves we were being responsible. We thought we were protecting you from embarrassment, or preventing you from getting in trouble for exaggerating. But we were really protecting ourselves from having to acknowledge how wrong we'd been about who you are." Derek, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Sarah, I want you to know that I've spent the last week researching military service, special operations, and combat decorations. Not to fact-check you this time, but to understand what you've actually accomplished. The Bronze Star with Valor isn't just a participation trophy. It's recognition for genuine heroism under fire." He pulled out his phone and showed me a document. I found the statistics. Out of approximately 2 million people who have served in Iraq and Afghanistan since 2001, Fewer than 8,000 have received the Bronze Star with valor. You're literally in the top 0.4% of combat veterans in terms of recognized heroic achievement. The numbers were accurate, though I'd never thought about my service in statistical terms before. And the Special Operations qualification puts you in an even more exclusive category, he continued. I work with data for a living, and from a purely analytical perspective, what you've achieved is extraordinary by any measure. Robert had been quiet throughout most of this, but now he cleared his throat. There's something else that needs to be said here. Sarah, you've grown into the kind of person I hoped to be when I was your age. Brave, principled, competent under pressure, the kind of soldier who makes a difference. He looked around the table at the rest of the family. But more than that, you've shown more maturity and grace in handling our failures than we deserved. A lesser person would have cut us off completely after what we put you through. I thought about it, I admitted. The silence that followed was heavy, with the weight of relationships hanging in the balance. Patricia finally broke it. What would it take for you to give us another chance? I had been thinking about that question for a week, ever since the ceremony had forced everyone to confront the reality of my service and achievements. I need to understand why you couldn't believe in me before I proved everything, I said. What was it about me that made you think I was incapable of the things I was actually doing? The question hung in the air like smoke. They exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the self-reflection it required. Emma was the first to answer. I think we saw you as someone who needed taking care of. The little sister who dropped out of nursing school, who seemed to struggle with direction and confidence. We couldn't imagine that person becoming a combat leader and special operations soldier. But that's not who I was when I joined the military, I pointed out. I was already changing, already growing into someone different. You just refused to see it. Jake nodded miserably. We had a story about who you were, and we didn't want to update it. It was easier to dismiss your achievements than to admit we'd underestimated you. And now? Patricia looked directly at me for the first time since I'd arrived. Now we see who you really are. A Bronze Star recipient, a special operations soldier, someone who has saved lives and eliminated terrorist threats and earned recognition at the highest levels of military leadership. But that's just the surface level, I said. Those are achievements, not character traits. Do you understand who I am as a person? The question seemed to surprise them. You're brave, Emma offered. You're competent under pressure, Derek added. You're dedicated to service, Patricia said. I shook my head. Those are all military qualities. What about the person underneath the uniform? Do you know what I value? What I care about? What drives me beyond just doing my job well? The silence stretched uncomfortably as they realized they couldn't answer that question. The truth is, I continued, you've never been interested in understanding who I am. You've only been interested in fitting me into categories that make sense to you. First as the confused younger sister who couldn't finish nursing school. Then as the delusional soldier making up stories. Now as the decorated war hero whose achievements you can finally accept. Robert leaned forward. Then help us understand. Tell us who you are. I thought about the question, about the person I'd become through years of deployment, combat, and leadership responsibilities that most people would never experience. I'm someone who believes that protecting people who can't protect themselves is worth personal sacrifice, I said. I'm someone who thinks competence and courage matter more than comfort and approval. I'm someone who has seen enough real suffering to know the difference between genuine problems and manufactured drama. I paused, watching their faces as they processed what I was telling them. And I'm someone who has learned that I don't need other people's validation to know my own worth, including yours. That last statement hit like a physical blow. Patricia's face crumpled, and Jake looked like he might be sick. What does that mean for us? Emma asked quietly. It means that I'm not sitting here hoping you'll finally approve of me or accept me or be proud of me. I'm sitting here deciding whether I want you to be part of my life going forward. The power dynamic was now completely inverted from 3 years ago. Instead of me seeking their acceptance, they were seeking mine. I leave for Germany tomorrow, I continued. I'll be working with international special operations units on classified missions that I can't discuss with anyone who doesn't have appropriate security clearance. My career is taking me to places and experiences that will be completely outside your ability to understand or relate to. Patricia was crying openly now. Does that mean we won't be part of your life anymore? It means the relationship has to be different. I can't have family members who publicly mock my service or privately undermine my credibility. I can't have people in my life who see my achievements as threats to their own self-image. I looked at each of them individually. But if you can genuinely accept who I've become, support what I'm doing, and treat me with the respect you'd show any other decorated combat veteran, then we can build something new. Jake spoke up. What would that look like practically? It means no more jokes about my service, even private ones. It means not sharing details about my assignments or achievements on social media without permission. It means accepting that there are aspects of my work I can't discuss, and not taking that personally. I took a breath, knowing the next part would be the hardest for them to hear. And it means understanding that my military career will always come first. I won't be available for every family gathering, holiday celebration, or personal crisis. I won't be living nearby or checking in regularly. My life is bigger than this town, and my responsibilities extend beyond this family. The table was quiet as they absorbed the terms I was laying out. Robert was the first to respond. That sounds fair, more than fair, considering how we've treated you. Emma nodded. I want to be part of your life, whatever that looks like. I want to learn about who you've become instead of trying to keep you in a box that made sense to me. Jake looked up from his hands. I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. I know I don't deserve another chance, but if you're willing to give me one, I won't waste it. Patricia wiped her eyes and straightened in her chair. Sarah, you're my daughter and I love you. I want to support you and be proud of you the way I should have been from the beginning. Then prove it, I said simply, not with words, but with actions. Show me over time that you can handle having a daughter whose life and achievements are bigger than what you expected. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the conversation settling over all of us. Finally, Robert raised his water glass. To Sergeant Sarah Mitchell, Bronze Star recipient and the finest soldier this family has ever produced. May she continue to serve with honor, and know that we're finally proud of who she's become. This time, when they raised their glasses, it felt different. Not like the mocking toast from 3 years ago, but like a genuine acknowledgement of respect earned and recognition deserved. As we left the restaurant, Patricia hugged me carefully, as if she was afraid I might disappear again. Will you write to us from Germany? She asked. If you want me to. We do, all of us. Jake approached last, his phone nowhere to be seen. Sarah, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but are we okay? We're starting over, I told him. Whether we end up okay depends on what you do from here. The next morning, Robert drove me to the airport. We talked about my new assignment, about his own experiences transitioning between military and civilian life, about the challenge of maintaining family relationships across the divide of military service. You know, he said as we pulled up to the departure terminal, I'm proud of who you've become, not just the medals and the achievements, but the person. You've got integrity and courage that most people never develop. Thanks, Dad. That means more coming from you than from anyone else. One last thing, he said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a small wooden box and handed it to me. These were my ribbons from Vietnam. I want you to have them. Inside the box were his service medals, including his own Bronze Star and Purple Heart. Decorations that told the story of his war, just as mine told the story of mine. I can't take these. You're not taking them, I'm giving them to you, one soldier to another. Keep them with your own medals as a reminder that service and sacrifice run in this family, even when we don't always understand each other. As my plane lifted off, I looked down at the small town where I'd grown up, where I'd learned to doubt myself, and where I'd finally learned to trust in my own capabilities regardless of other people's limitations. 3 years ago, I'd left as someone seeking approval and validation from people who couldn't see beyond their own assumptions. I was returning to military service as someone who had learned that the only approval that mattered was my own, earned through competence and courage and commitment to something larger than myself. The family I was leaving behind wasn't the same one that had mocked my decision to serve. They were people who had been forced to confront their own limitations and were trying to grow beyond them. Whether they succeeded would determine the future of our relationships, but it no longer determined my sense of self-worth. My phone buzzed with a message from Major Barnes, "Transport to Germany confirmed. Looking forward to working with you again, Sergeant Mitchell." I smiled, looking out at the clouds below and the horizon ahead. Somewhere out there were missions that would test every skill I'd developed, teammates who would judge me solely on my ability to do the job, and opportunities to make a difference in ways most people would never know about. That was exactly where I belonged. The girl who had sat at that Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago, desperately hoping for family acceptance, was gone. In her place was a decorated combat veteran, special operations qualified, with a proven track record of competence under pressure and the confidence that comes from knowing you've earned your place through merit rather than birthright. Some people will never believe in you until you've proven everything. Others will believe in you before you've proven anything. The key is learning to believe in yourself regardless of which category the people around you fall into. I'd finally learned that lesson. Everything else was just details. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.